As we move past 12 months of fighting in the Middle East, the war has only intensified. Since vowing to avenge the bloodshed of October 7, Israel is now engaged in conflicts on multiple fronts, threatening to engulf the entire region.
Today, Israel is defending itself on 7 fronts against the enemies of civilization.
As the fighting grows, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has outlined the threats he says his country is facing, starting with fronts in the West Bank and Gaza.
We're fighting in Gaza against Hamas, those savages who murdered, raped, beheaded, and burned our people on October 7th.
There's Lebanon.
A major escalation in the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah. Its longtime leader has been killed.
We're fighting in Lebanon against Hezbollah, the most heavily armed terror organization in the world,
There's Iran.
which last week fired over 200 ballistic missiles directly at Israel.
Iran said its targets included Israeli air bases and the Mossad headquarters.
And Yemen, Iraq and Syria.
We're fighting against the Houthis in Yemen and the Shiite militias in Iraq and Syria that together have launched hundreds of drones and missile attacks against Israel. For in defending ourselves against this barbarism, Israel is defending civilizations against those who seek to impose a dark age of fanaticism on all of us.
Israel is now re-establishing its military dominance of the region. And I see a weakened Hezbollah, much weakened Hamas, and a vulnerable-looking Iran. What I see is Iran being clearly exposed as the primary backer of the terrorist groups that have been attacking Israel, Hamas and Hezbollah, but also militias in Iraq and Syria. Iran has trained, equipped and supplied these terrorist groups who share an objective of destroying the state of Israel.
In just 12 months, the loss of life is staggering. More than 1,100 killed on October 7, nearly 42,000 killed in Gaza, and a further 2,000 killed in Lebanon so far. The death toll rising as more of the region is dragged into conflict, an escalation with no sign of stopping.
As Israel fights the forces of barbarism led by Iran, all civilized countries should be standing firmly by Israel's side.
So as the world marks the grim one-year anniversary of October 7, with peace further away than ever, when will the bloodshed end?
Well, it could get worse if the Iranian regime thinks it now has no option but to be involved in a direct war with Israel. Hamas thought this was a time to eradicate Israel in an all-out war joined by Hezbollah and Iran. That hasn't happened.
Rest assured, Israel will fight until the battle is won, for our sake and for the sake of the peace and security of the entire world.
Okay, when is the battle won?
Yeah.
And because it doesn't feel like the peace and security of the world is coming closer.
Yeah. And the question of when is the battle won is like a central question in any war.
Yes.
And it's one of the hardest things to answer. We saw that in Afghanistan, we saw that in Iraq. Often these military excursions get out of control and it becomes very hard to retain. What Michael Shoebridge said at the end of that package is right. Now it's becoming an open confrontation between Iran and Israel. And it really can go one of two ways. One is Israel has called Iran's bluff and Iran is exposed as not really being up for a fight with Israel because they're worried about America getting involved and they just back down, or Israel ramps it up further, starts hitting nuclear sites and so on.
And Iran's got nuclear weapons.
Well, it's ambiguous. So this is one of the things. One of their strategies has been, do we not, right?
Okay.
And so the idea is that if they hit those sites, then they take that capacity away. Now, all that relies on the idea that Iran ultimately can just be dissuaded. If you just hit them hard enough in the right places.
The lady doesn't seem for turning.
Right. What's tricky about that strategy is it is so high risk because what do all the other countries, what does Turkey do if you do that?
Right.
What does Saudi Arabia do in that? Saudi Arabia was inching towards a peace agreement with Israel. That's clearly on hold and not going to happen. Are they going to fight on Israel's side? I mean, they've been rivals with Iran, but
Like
in this situation...
in the region.
What does Russia do?
Yeah, right.
There are so... And you could go from what was a fairly, like a horrific but contained situation to a regional situation to something that even goes beyond the region. The stakes
Well, that's what it feels like.
Yes. And none of us knows, and we also don't know what the stated end game looks like. Like what's meant to happen what happens in Gaza the day after the war? What happens if we have a war with Iran? If that's what's going to happen, is it regime change? Is it like what? All of this is undefined, and that is why it is so terrifying at the moment to look at. It really is.
Because Iran's goal has always been it wants to basically destroy Israel.
I've always been opposed to Israel.
Yeah.
But Iran was weak, and now they've been strengthened again. So
Well, part of the reason Iran's stronger is because of the Iraq War, right?
Right.
Like, all of this just becomes a real mess. And then you've got all these these countries around Israel that are allies with Israel, but the peoples of those populations are looking at what's happening. They don't like Israel right now. It's so precarious. This is a high wire act with unbelievable stakes.